We'll go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to the North Richland Hills City Council Budget Work Session. It is 8 a.m. and I will call the 8:30 a.m. Sorry, thank you for saying that. I got here quite a while ago. I will call the July 31st, 2026 City Council Budget Work Session to order. A quorum of the City Council is present and the meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act of the Texas Government Code. We will start with the Council Member Roberts. Is going to read scripture and do a prayer for us.
Okay. Good morning. I trust everyone's doing well today. As you know, we've been entrusted with the responsibility of governing and running our city, and today is a very important part of that. So as we seek God's guidance, let's listen to these words from Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. There is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. Because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, and honor to whom honor is owed. Let's pray. Lord, we give this day to you. Guide our minds, our thoughts. Lord, we're grateful for the opportunity that we have to serve. Be with us today. In Jesus' name, amen.
And then I want to say I read the summary and that Paulette had done from the whole budget, and I want to say you did a great job. Obviously, spent a tremendous amount of time. I was grateful because it's easy to read something that was run through AI, and that was not. It was, but it was a nice aggregation when I was tying back to all the details. A lot of the stuff that was there, and I didn't look for any errors, but I didn't see any either. So. You're welcome. So having said that, Paulette, floor is yours.
Okay, I guess we'll kick it off with the budget video, and as Mary's playing that, I will walk over to the, Chase is playing that. As Chase is playing that, I'll walk over there and do my presentation. Just bear with me that this is going to be a little bit longer introduction than maybe we've had the last couple of years. There's a lot of information I want to cover right up front, so it's going to be a long one.
Is this the chair? Sit here?
We look over here. Oh, okay, this one.
Is this on? We're really making a documentary about the budget. Does Paulette know?
You know, it's really not just about numbers. It's about serving people and setting the standard.
It's where community becomes reality.
Parks, the library, animal services. It's all in there.
There are no magic money trees. We checked.
How much time do we have? A lot happens to keep the city running. A lot.
There are spreadsheets. A lot of spreadsheets.
It pays for public safety.
It turns out that police cars and fire trucks don't run on good intentions.
Well, it's balanced, which is good, because I'd probably be fired if it wasn't.
Pavement and pipes. They're not glamorous until they stop working.
Okay. That was just a little fun, but that is what I will call your attention to today is Our budget is much more than just the numbers and the finances. It's really laying out our work plan for the next year, but also in this case, more than ever for the next several years. We're kind of setting the stage for that. So good morning, mayors and members of the city council. Mayors, there's only one mayor. That's Jack McCarty. Members of the city council, welcome to our fiscal year 2027 budget work session. I'm excited to be here with you today to present our proposed budget, which represents months of hard work and a new perspective on how we serve the residents of North Richland Hills. And so to start out, this year, the leadership team embraced a word for the year, and the word is new. This word has guided us as we continue our journey to become the standard for transparent, resident-focused, fiscally responsible, business-welcoming municipal government in Texas. So the word new guided us to new perspectives as we look at our operations and as we looked at the budget, reframing issues, widening our lens, choosing curiosity over judgment, asking better questions, listening to the voice of the customer, and noticing what's working and what's not. This new perspective led us to the theme for this year's budget, which is New Standard, New Perspectives. Over the last several years, we've experienced a number of issues that have culminated in what we now recognize as structural fiscal challenges for our city. The first is the flattening of our revenues. After decades of growth, the reality is that we are quickly approaching build-out of our city. This has led to significant decreases in new construction over the last few years, with the largest decrease reflected in this year's certified values. The Texas legislature has also enacted laws to reduce the property tax burden for homeowners, including revenue caps, new property value exemptions for homeowners and now for businesses, with additional revenue constraints and business and expense caps to be considered in the upcoming legislative session. We're also experiencing changes in the appraisal plan and methodology by the Tarrant Appraisal District. Appraisals now occur every other year, and we've also seen in that a granting of a record number of protests, with this year being the highest number of protests we've seen, even though properties were not reappraised. And then we also have seen higher total value reductions as a result of lawsuits that occur during the protest time. Finally, we have future legislative constraints to consider, including not increasing, but for the first time ever, considering expense caps on municipal governments, placing constraints on our ability to issue debt to fund capital and infrastructure needs, lowering the senior freeze and exemption age from 65 to 55, and eliminating the school district property tax, which doesn't affect us directly, but I think it foreshadows what may be to come for local governments. Flattening of the revenues is only part of the story. The city has also experienced dramatic cost increases due to inflation and increased costs passed on to us from other entities. First, with infrastructure and fleet maintenance. As our city ages, maintenance costs rise for streets, water and sewer lines, drainage, and city fleet, including police vehicles, fire apparatus, and street and utility equipment. Second, there are market and utility pressures. We're absorbing significant rate increases for wholesale water from Fort Worth and TRA, along with higher electric costs from Encore to power city facilities and streetlights. Third is external pressures. Costs that are outside of our control continue to increase, including, I'd mentioned it before, but electricity, water purchase, sewer treatment, even election costs, and higher charges from regional entities like TAD. And then finally, salary pressures. The cost of maintaining our position in a tight labor market has also increased significantly. Providing services to our residents requires people, which is why offering competitive salaries, compensation, and training are essential for keeping top talent. Oh, there was one more. And fifth, service demands. Resident expectations for rapid, high-quality city services are constantly increasing. When you combine the flat revenues with these escalating costs, it's clear why we had to rethink our approach this year, and we'll need to continue this approach into future years. You may recall that as part of our planning session with council last year, we set a bold goal to become the statewide standard for municipal operations. While we have taken that challenge to heart, the reality is the world is changing fast and we have to adapt. Our response has been to drive efficiency and cost consciousness into all of our operations in order to preserve the safety and quality of life of our community. In order to embrace a new standard for our city, we have to look at our budget through a new lens in order to change our trajectory in the face of the structural fiscal challenges that are occurring. Our top priority is driving efficiency into every department. That means we're using Lean Six Sigma concepts to optimize workflows and eliminate waste, bottlenecks, and redundancy so departments run as smoothly and efficiently as possible. We are also implementing strategic program sunsets and cost savings. We're using stop doing lists to phase out outdated, redundant, and low-impact processes. By letting go of what's not working anymore, we free up our staff to focus on what really matters. We are looking at cost recovery and new revenue generation, focusing on cost recovery and generation of new revenue from sources other than property tax. We're also shifting toward multi-year budgeting and long-range financial planning. This allows us to forecast and plan for budget shortfalls and ensure that the city has the revenue it needs to provide city services into the future. At the same time, we are keeping our focus on core services. There are also essential things our community truly cannot do without, so we want to make sure the city has the revenues it needs to provide those services. When you tie all these practical shifts together, it's really about future-proofing NRH operations so we can continue to serve our community and prepare for what's to come. Let me pause for a little drink of water here. So first, I want to talk to you about what have we accomplished over the last year as we worked through this current year budget and tried to achieve as many of the council goals and tasks that you've established for us. We've made great strides in accomplishing the city's goals and becoming the standard. First, process improvements and efficiency, which, as I've mentioned, is our top priority. Our efficiency and process improvement focus has resulted in clearing out bottlenecks, cutting redundancy, and eliminating waste. Efficiency studies were completed for fleet, information technology, and permitting, and 2 more studies are currently underway for facilities and utility billing. The completed studies resulted in numerous recommendations to improve efficiency, but also concluded that we're operating too lean in most areas. Our teams are actively putting those recommendations into place. Our Lean Six Sigma process improvement training has resulted in at least 1 dedicated process improvement expert in every department. This has paid off in some of the budget sunsets and savings you see in this proposed budget and results in continuous review of workflows to make sure the city is genuinely easier to do business with. And this slide shows you a few examples of process improvements that have been completed or things that have been eliminated this past year. So first, we'll be phasing out outdated pet licensing requirements. This saves administrative overhead and makes things easier for our residents. Second, we implemented a modern fire fleet replacement schedule to ensure our emergency vehicles provide the necessary response, and this is resulting in about $170,000 in savings a year over the next few years. It also shifts the focus to provide the emergency response vehicles that we need for most responses in our city. Third, we conducted a citywide fleet review to optimize workflows, update our technology, and improve service efficiency. This resulted in a decrease in the city's fleet by retiring underutilized vehicles and equipment. Finally, we revamped our purchasing and contract processes to cut down on delays and to make the whole process faster for everyone involved, from the vendor to the city council. We've also made great progress in implementing the recommendations of the completed efficiency studies. In permitting, we've implemented several measures to simplify and streamline the development process. First, we launched a new online engineering permit that is separate from the overall development permit. This has allowed for faster approval of engineering plans and clearing properties for early grading as appropriate. Second, we restructured the permitting process into 2 phases. This allows applicants to clear technical hurdles before dealing with costly fees and bonding. Our early pilot phase of this restructure is already proving successful in demonstrating more efficient flow of permits. The efficiency study also recommended that we streamline the building permit process to make it easier to navigate. We're cross-training our building inspectors so they can solve problems faster and cut down on inspection scheduling delays for residents and business and builders. We've also set up personalized dashboards for the team, allowing them to keep a close eye on application timelines and track upcoming deadlines. Finally, we're in the middle of updating our fee schedule to make sure the fees cover the cost to review plans and perform these inspections. In the way of community engagement, this is also a priority to increase our community engagement and connection with our community. This past year, the council successfully appointed a Citizens Capital Program Advisory Committee that we also call the Bond Committee, which was composed of 30 citizens that represented a diverse cross-section of our community. The Bond Committee assessed and prioritized a list of recommended capital projects for an upcoming bond election, which an item will be placed on your August 10th agenda to call the election for November. We also established the first in NRH Intergovernmental and Legislative Affairs program. This group is led by a subcommittee of the City Council and a task force made up of 9 NRH residents. This group will study legislation as it goes through the upcoming legislative session and partner with our residents to advocate for policy decisions that serve our community's best interests. That group has already met twice, and it's been mostly focused on educational efforts, but I think it's going to be a great group. And then we've also maintained outreach initiatives by continuing to find ways to connect with our residents. We took our messages directly into the community using structured town halls, budget roadshows, and by gathering regular community feedback through flash vote surveys. This past year, we also conducted a comprehensive citizen survey to measure how our community feels about our progress. And as you can see, the results were overall positive, with most people saying that we are headed in the right direction, given good ratings for the quality of life here, safety, city services. Most people are saying the city is doing better than other area cities. 83% would recommend NRH to friends or family as a great place to live. 86% say that our fire and EMS are good or very good. And we have an impressive police responsiveness rating. For facilities and events, a majority of residents gave high marks to the library, NRH Center, Parks and Trails, and community events. And 70% of respondents said the city should invest more in road maintenance. 50% would like to see more incentives to attract quality restaurants and businesses to North Richland Hills. And residents who contacted the city in the past year reported positive experiences with pretty much all of our departments.
Kind of to your point on the survey itself, the one that measures, I think, even on a national poll, the 75% moving in the right direction, usually it extends itself to elections at the same time. And you saw our election results pretty much mirrored the 75 across, if you only had 2 in the race, but I think that kind of points to the same thing, and you'll see that in national election too. I think that's always the best question, and it's rare 75% of people agree on anything. So I think it's a very strong mark that I think that we are doing a lot that people are happy with right now. So.
Okay, yeah, I agree. The council also established a destination marketing program to promote the area to boost tourism and visits to NRH. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. Here we are. This is the right slide. It shows Peppa Pig, Matt, so I'm sure you're excited. And Patrick Mahomes, that's true. The council established a destination marketing program. Thanks to our amazing local attractions, our city has become a major regional hotspot for travel and recreation. The goal of this program is to increase the number of visitors, to expand and diversify the local tax base. This program will market our city to attract visitors. The council approved a contract earlier this year with the consultant who will work with city staff and collaborate with local businesses that rely on tourism to develop a marketing campaign. Work on this effort already started this week. This program is funded by the hotel occupancy taxes. This last year, we've been successful in attracting high-quality sit-down restaurants to our city. Both Barrel and Bones and Blue Goose Cantina are now open, operating, and doing well. In addition, La Madeleine is under construction and is set to open in the coming months. Construction is also well underway at our restaurant park location where Jake's and Tacos and Avocados will be located. We expect Jake's and Tacos and Avocados to open this fall. On the redevelopment front, our Easy Streets program continues to make progress. We have successfully completed our second major Easy Streets project. If you look at the before and after photos on this slide, you can see the dramatic improvement this program brings to our commercial corridors. We continue to focus on making NRH a great place to work by supporting our amazing staff who makes all of this possible. I am proud to share that the city has been honored as a 2026 Culture Excellence Award winner. NRH ranked among the very top organizations, earning 6 individual awards recognizing excellence in employee appreciation, work-life flexibility, employee well-being, compensation and benefits, purpose and values, and professional development. This incredible achievement is a direct reflection of our city leadership and the dedication of more than 700 full-time and part-time employees. This slide is all about celebrating our team's commitment to excellence. It highlights many of the national and regional awards the city brought home this past year. The award-winning culture is exactly what keeps our city services so responsive, efficient, and friendly every single day. To keep building on that positive energy, this past year, we created the committee about 2 years ago, but they've been even more active this year, and that's the NRH Fund Committee. This is a group led by employees that helps to drive morale year-round through creative connection events. We also created an electronic suggestion box to give every employee an easy way to share ideas and feedback. Finally, we continue to invest in successful programs to help retention and training and recruitment. We also made historic investments in improving city streets. Our public works street crew continues to focus on improving street conditions in NRH. The past year, more 2020 bond projects were completed, and we will deliver on the city's promise to voters to complete all of the 2020 bond projects by 2027. In addition, more preventive street maintenance projects are being completed than ever before as the City Council doubled the funding for this program, and the Public Works street crew completed double the amount of preventive street maintenance projects over the last year. So this leads me to an update on the 2020 bond program. All 18 residential streets are complete, along with 6 major streets. The 4 remaining major streets are in varying stages of design or construction, and those streets are Main Street, Harwood Road, North Richland Boulevard, and Chapman Road. And again, all of the 2020 projects will be completed by the end of 2027. All right, so now we're going to move into the next section. Are there any questions or comments anybody has?
Just a question, and you mentioned, what's the reason for the huge increase in running an election? I know it went up over 300%.
I don't know. That's what the county charges us for holding the elections. I don't know if Alicia has any answer, but yeah.
Over the past few years, Councilmember Getz, there's been an increase in locations with Tarrant County, and we've got the countywide polling locations in uniform election dates in November, according to state law. November elections in even-numbered years, we are required to use the county polling precincts, where as compared to when we have our elections. When we have our elections in May, the municipalities have only 1 or 2 polling locations. So it's going to be more polling locations in November elections as opposed to May. And then plus their increased cost with deliveries that Tarrant County is experiencing and paying for the election clerks and judges. Where on election day, sometimes they have upwards to 150 or 200 people that work in election.
Okay. So
I also think the county bore more of the cost, and I think they're pushing some of it back down to the cities as well. That's what I think I'm seeing too.
Okay. All right, well, with that, that's a good entry into our proposed budget highlights. So now that we've shared how our staff has spent the last year supporting the city goals, we'll move into an overview of the proposed budget and all that went into preparing the plan of work that it's before you today. I want to start with talking about our inflationary costs and cost increases that we've absorbed into this proposed budget. Additions from the budget that resulted directly from inflation total over $3.8 million across all city funds, with the largest of the increases reflected in the utility fund for the purchase of water, along with sewer treatment costs from the City of Fort Worth and Trinity River Authority. Inflationary additions to the general fund budget total almost $344,000, which is equivalent to a half cent on the property tax rate. Second, unfunded mandates continue to impact the city's budget. This year alone, this is just this year's additions, we've added $332,066 total. This amount includes the addition of campus officers reflected in the CCD fund, Crime Control and Prevention District, for those that don't know what the CCD fund is, the addition of costs to bring our wastewater mains and manholes into compliance with new federal regulations, and $21,407 in the general fund to ensure the city's websites comply with new ADA regulations. And again, this doesn't even begin to touch all of the unfunded mandates that are included in our budget. These are just the additions that we're including this year. The proposed budget also includes almost $459,000 in expense reductions resulting from process improvements, program sunsets, and the elimination of underutilized positions, most of which are part-time and are vacant. This also includes the elimination of non-essential training and anything that we would have considered nice-to-have items across all departments to find the savings. Almost $237,000 of the savings is reflected in the general fund, which is equivalent to 1/3 of a cent on the tax rate. Another priority in preparing the proposed budget is cost recovery and increasing revenue from sources other than property tax. The proposed budget includes funding for cost recovery and fee studies in several areas, including permit fees, impact fee and water rate studies, emergency medical charges and ambulance billing, and other charges for service, such as NRH Center memberships and rentals, fees at Richland Tennis Center, and park amenity reservation charges, just to name a few. So now I'm going to talk about what did we add to the budget. So that's the amount that we were kind of forced to absorb through inflationary or cost increases. And now we'll talk about the amount that we've actually added to the budget. We'll start with that amount less any compensation and benefit recommendations, and I'll get into those here in just a minute. But the true increases to the proposed budget, which are only those that are within our control, total $1.86 million and make up less than 1% of the total proposed budget. Just over $609,000 of these additions is reflected in the general fund, which is equal to less than 1 cent of the property tax rate. These additions represent departments' needs to support their operations in providing services to our community. To make these additions possible, we focused on finding offsets. We reduced costs where possible, eliminated underutilized programs and services, and cut out underutilized positions. This allowed us to reallocate those funds to accommodate new priorities and service demands. You can see the list of major additions on pages 10 through 12 of the proposed document, budget document that you have. But I'll run through some of those, some of the major ones in these slides. So in the general fund, again, the additions that we added reflect $609,678, which is less than 1 cent of the property tax rate. This includes street brining equipment and a snow plow attachment to better respond when we have snow and ice events, 1 additional dispatcher and additional consulate in dispatch, upgrading the backup dispatch center, upgrades to city mapping and geographical information system, the destination marketing program, video content staff, which is actually an upgrade to our existing personnel, and half of that is funded in general, not half, but some is funded in general fund and some is funded in the promotional fund. We are reestablishing the assistant to the city manager position through an upgrade of an existing position. So the executive secretary in my department, she is transitioning to an admin position in the police department. And with that vacancy, we're asking to upgrade that position to create an assistant to the city manager position that will help support additional projects and analytics, including our legislative and intergovernmental affairs program and those types of things. We're going to be repurposing the business appreciation lunch into the Heart of NRH Appreciation Luncheon. And so several council members have requested ways to recognize volunteers and citizens of the year and that type of thing. So this year we're going to revamp the business appreciation lunch to be the Heart of NRH Appreciation Luncheon. At the luncheon, we'll recognize the Citizen of the Year, Volunteer of the Year, Board and Commission Member of the Year, and Business of the Year. We plan to start accepting nominations from the community in September, and we'll have a selection committee review them. The mayor will also give a State of the City report during this luncheon, and we have the Grand Hall booked for December 3rd for this event. And I'm going to review the event and the application process and everything in more detail with you all at the August 10th City Council work session. In the Crime Control District Fund, it's addition of $98,674. This is 3 additional campus officer positions, which is an unfunded mandate, school resource officer sergeant position, the salary increases for the campus officers to improve recruitment for those positions, and upgrading police officer body cameras. And I just make a note that those cameras are required by state law. In the Park and Recreation Facility Corporation Fund, the Parks Fund, we're adding $411,188 to upgrade outdoor weather warning sirens at ball fields, to provide automatic external defibrillators at community parks, to provide for NRH Center robotic maintenance, which will result in $37,000 in annual savings, to increase maintenance at NRH 20 Family Water Park, and to increase maintenance for Cross Timbers Park. In the utility fund, these are the additions less the increases in the water and water purchases and sewer treatment rates, which we'll go over in detail when we review the utility fund. But outside of that, it's $89,038 to enhance radio connectivity on water towers to improve water monitoring, purchase a double stack trench box to improve employee safety when they're making repairs to water and sewer lines, and annual maintenance costs for the new generator at the College Hills pump station. Some other significant additions to the budget that are in funds outside of the general fund is the continuation of the restaurant rewards program, which is in the promotional fund, implementing a destination marketing program, which is also in the promotional fund, maintaining the business improvement and growth program, or what we call the BIG program, which is in the Economic Development Fund, and then implementing a legislative tracking software program, which is in the Information Technology Fund. There's also costs included in the budget to review our cost of service, cost recovery, and fee and charges for service review in detail. There is also some funding to continue implementation of efficiency study recommendations. The Information Technology Fund, the upgrades that are necessary to scan and to upgrade our vulnerability scanning and patching system. It also includes staffing recommendations. You might recall that the efficiency study recommended the addition of several positions in IT. We're not able to accommodate that, but what we're proposing is to upgrade a part-time position to full-time, and then adding a full-time systems administrator position. In the Fleet Services Fund, we've reduced our fleet footprint by removing a total of 9 underutilized vehicles and pieces of equipment across all departments. Well, it's 9 total. Aligned staffing to improve maintenance and operations of the city's fleet, and we're proposing to add a fleet maintenance software program to improve our fleet maintenance and management. And then in the Facilities Fund study and the utility billing study are currently underway, and so we've budgeted amounts in each of those funds to begin implementation of any recommendations over the next fiscal year. We expect that both of those studies will be completed in the fall. And then lastly, to continue our focus on efficiency and process improvement, we've included $15,000 total for project management training for most of our city leadership and other staff. This provides training on project management fundamentals and will establish a standard unified approach across all departments to project management. This will help our staff with initial project scoping, cost estimation, and overall scheduling and effectiveness. Are there any questions on those before I get into the compensation and benefit recommendations? Okay, all right. Okay, so again, the proposed budget includes compensation and benefit recommendations to remain competitive in the employment market. These include a 3% range and step increase for all sworn public safety, and a 2% merit for general government with an additional 1% for those who exceed expectations. The total cost is $1.4 million across all funds, and you can see how that breaks down in the general fund on this slide. Our employees are the heart of how we provide the high level of service our residents expect. To enhance retention and enhance recruiting, this budget also includes several highly innovative employee-focused measures. We're keeping employee health care premiums flat, and in the city manager's letter in your proposed budget, it kind of goes into detail on the reasons that we're able to do that, which is essentially that our employees are, according to other benchmarks, among the healthiest in all government insurance medical groups that our benefits provider has locked in. So what does that mean? I think it means that the wellness measures and preventive measures and education measures that we've implemented over the last several years have resulted in a better claims experience on average than most other government insurance fund. So that explains why our self-insurance fund performs better than most other government funds. So we're not increasing premiums to the employees again this year, and that means we're also not increasing the city's share of funding to the self-insurance fund. And Patrick ran the numbers, and that savings, if you factor in that it's 10%, using the number that that our fund performs at 10% better than our benchmark groups. It's about an $840,000 savings to our taxpayers, just because we're all trying to stay healthy.
You know, I'm just liking them, I'm very sensitive about health insurance, but the whole idea of going back to morale and happy employees or healthy employees, healthy people, it is a snowball effect from wellness programs, because I want to be better, I want to show up to work, I want to be in a better mood. And I don't really think, you know, having handed out lots of premium increases to companies over colleges and universities, but over time, that how much value that really is to the taxpayers of having that kind of positive morale, because it is a real savings of over $800,000 to the taxpayers that we would be looking at absorbing. And you know, in the church business, the kind of rate increases that y'all were getting as of late, which was pretty healthy, because all of the pools are really experiencing some pretty good increases. So I think this is, I know it doesn't show up for a lot, but this is really something to be applauded, and what a great job that y'all are doing at the city for the employees, because it really does reflect back in quite a savings.
In talking with other area city managers, even some of the other ones that are self-insured are going to see some premium increases, but the ones that are not self-insured, that are on fully insured plans, are looking at implementing 20 to 25% increases in their employee premiums this year. So the fact that we are able to maintain premiums this year, I'm not promising we're going to be able to do it every year into the future, but it just speaks volumes to the efforts that we make in our plan and keeping our employees healthy and happy for the most part, for at least what we can control. Also, we are looking to implement, and we've already started work on this, a primary care clinic. So a few years ago, the city had an employee health care clinic that was located in the medical office buildings at North Hills Hospital. That clinic closed down, so we haven't had that clinic in a few years. But this option provides an employee health care clinic with a direct relationship that we're working on with North Hills Family Medicine. And North Hills Family Medicine has several locations in the area, of course in North Richland Hills, close to the hospital, but they have one in Keller, they have one in the Colony, and they'll be opening a location in Justin next year. This will save employees out of pocket costs, but it will also save the city money this year and over the long run. And another proposal, and again, I'll say that this has been one of the most requested things in our employee suggestion box, especially since we've seen the city of Keller go to, I think they're closed the whole day on Friday. They're only open Monday through Thursday. Another area city, Richland Hills, is closed on Friday. Many cities in the DFW area have gone to either half-day Friday or they are not open on Fridays. So this would be, I'm proposing to adjust city facility hours, administrative offices, to Monday through Thursday, 7:30 a.m. to 5. It's supposed to be 5 p.m. Does that say 5 p.m. on the slide? My notes are wrong. And a half-day Friday from 7:30 a.m. To noon on Friday. Although the numbers don't show that this would result in any significant cost savings, this modern schedule directly addresses recruitment and retention challenges. It provides a highly sought-after quality of life benefit and aligns NRH with scheduling models already adopted by area municipalities. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in our presentation, but we'd propose that this would begin on January 1st so that there's time to accommodate schedules and hours and educate the public of those new hours of operation. So not only is it one of the most suggested things that we get in that electronic suggestion box, but it's also begun to show up on some of our exit surveys of people who have left the city to go to other cities, is that ability to have Friday afternoons or Fridays off to offer a more flexible schedule. All right, the next thing we're going to get into is the property values and the property tax rate. Do I have any questions, though, or comments on the compensation and benefit recommendations before we move on? Okay. Okay, so this is the next heavy topic we have to talk about today is our property values and property tax rates. So let's get into it. Over the last 5 years, the City Council has taken measures to provide significant property tax relief to NRH residents. Since 2020, the City Council has steadily lowered the tax rate from 57.57 cents in 2020 to 49.7841 cents in 2025, and that's a 13.5% reduction in the tax rate over those 5 years. The city also increased the homestead exemption to 20% in 2022, which is the maximum allowed by law. During this same time period, property values increased by 44.1%. But the tax relief measures implemented by the City Council and the state legislature resulted in an 8% decrease in the average homeowner's tax bill in that same time period, which is a savings of $469. Even as the average appraised home value rose by $110,000 on average, or 44.1% between 2020 and 2025, the average taxpayer's combined bill went down about 8.1%. Residents have received meaningful savings over the last 5 years. Because the City Council lowered the property tax rate and increased the local homestead exemption, NRH residents, and again, this slide focuses just on the city tax bill portion, NRH residents saved $530,000 on the city portion of their tax bill. As we've discussed now several times, property values are down significantly this year. The net taxable values are down 4.7%. New construction values are down over 58%. Average market value and taxable value is down over 1% according to certified values provided by TAD. So that's average market value is down 1.1% and average taxable value is down 1.4%. There's an inverse relationship between property values and the tax rate. When values are down, the calculated tax rates go up because there's more required to generate the same amount of revenue as the previous year's adopted budget. So this just also shows you that history of those new construction values, which further drives our property tax revenues down. Again, knowing that we're approaching build out, we've expected that our new construction values would steadily decrease over the years. But this decrease this year was shocking. It's a lot less than what we were estimating the new construction values to come in based on our permit values. But nonetheless, we saw a 59% reduction in our new construction values. As a result, both the no new revenue rate and the voter approval rate are significantly higher than the current year adopted property tax rate. Because the city adopted a rate below the voter approval rate, or we call it the VAR for short, over the past 3 years, we have accumulated unused tax increment that can be used in addition to the standard 3.5% increase over the no new revenue rate to calculate the voter approval rate. This unused increment represents what the Truth in Taxation form calls the total foregone revenue amount, which is the difference in dollars between what the city would have received had the VAR been adopted each year compared to what was actually adopted. The amount of increment over the last 3 years equates to over $1 million or 1.43 cents on the tax rate. The preliminary rate included in the proposed budget is highlighted on this slide, and is below the VAR and uses only the portion of the increment that will expire if we don't use it this year. So you can see that the proposed rate included in the budget, or the preliminary rate we should call it, included in the budget is shown there, and it's 0.555144 cents per $100 evaluation, and that does utilize the expired increment. And so what does that mean? This slide provides an example of how this portion of the increment is included in the tax rate calculation. If a local government adopts a tax rate lower than its maximum allowed voter approval rate in a given year, it is allowed to bank that capacity for use in a future tax year. The unused increment is the difference between the VAR and the actual tax rate, and it will no longer be accessible in the future if not used for adopting the tax rate that year. The amount that would expire this year, if not used, is a little less than 1 cent. You can see it there, of increment on this year. And that equates to $647,915 in property tax revenue, that if we don't adopt a rate including this expiring increment, we would not be able to get that revenue. That would be total foregone revenue forever. So going back to this slide, it shows the various tax rate calculations and impacts on the average homeowner at each rate. You can see that the preventive street maintenance funding is what's adjusted to accommodate each of the varying tax rates. The $3.6 million in preventive street maintenance funding is what is included in the proposed budget, which coincides with the preliminary tax rate reflected in the proposed budget. You can also see that the proposed budget does not include an appropriation of fund balance to fund preventive street maintenance. This slide shows the City Council the impact to taxpayers and to the budget should Council choose to adopt a proposed rate that is different than the preliminary rate. Let me back up. Should the Council choose to adopt a tax rate that is different than the preliminary rate used to prepare the proposed budget. And so we'll revisit this slide at the end of the day as the Council discusses proposing a tax rate. The City Council will need to act on a proposed tax rate during the August 10th City Council meeting. And one thing I always remind is that when you set the proposed rate, when you're considering adopting the tax rate later on this summer, you can adopt a rate that is lower than the proposed tax rate that you adopted, but you can't adopt a rate that's higher. So just keep that in mind as we continue that discussion later on today. Okay, are there any questions on the property values and tax rate? All right, so in order to understand the thinking behind the proposed budget and the preliminary tax rate proposed, let's look at what we're preparing for as we look ahead. Let's start with bills we're expecting to be considered by the state legislature in the upcoming session, which include further constraints on property taxes, along with consideration of further exemptions, as well as the addition of expenditure caps. So you can see these are the legislative priorities issued by Governor Abbott earlier this year. Strict regulations on data centers, protecting and expanding school choice, banning land sales to foreign adversaries. And then what's most concerning to us is the 5-point plan targeting local property taxes. And again, it goes through everything I was just talking about. Spending limits, which they would propose to be local government expenditure growth limited to population and inflation, or 3.5%. The lesser of the two. Voter approval, requiring 2/3 of voters to approve any property tax increase ballot measure, which would include GO bonds. Voter rollbacks, which would trigger a rollback election with signatures from 15% of registered voters. So currently, if a city council adopts a tax rate that is over the voter approval rate, it triggers an automatic election for the citizens. Let's see. So the VAR is a strict ceiling, and so again, the city proposes a rate above that, an election triggers automatically. If they stay below it, there's no election that happens under current law. Under Abbott's proposal, the citizen petition acts as a voter-initiated floor drop. Even if a city successfully sets a rate below the VAR, the 15% petition mechanism would give citizens the unique leverage to proactively force an election to slash that rate anyway. So again, that's just something that's in the governor's plan to be considered in a future legislative session. And then you can see the interim charges that were issued by Lieutenant Governor Patrick and House Speaker Burrows follow along those lines. So what does that mean? In the interim, there are various committees that are giving charges of things to study as they prepare for the upcoming legislative session. And you can see, I won't read through the entire list, but that those fall in line with the priorities that the governor outlined. One of the main differences in Lieutenant Governor Patrick's plan versus the governor's plan is this Operation Double Nickel and aggressive tax relief. And that's where you would see the reduction of qualifying for senior freezes and senior ceilings. That age go from 65 to 55. And later on in the presentation, we'll cover what that could mean to our revenues in the future.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
That you may not know.
Oh.
If we pass a rate under the voter rate, and hypothetically speaking, 15% of voters want to do a rollback and it gets approved in an election, does it default to a certain rate?
It defaults to the no new revenue rate.
Okay, thank you.
So, but again, that law isn't in effect yet. That's something that they're going to be considering in the upcoming legislative session.
Kind of, and just generally speaking, I know some people think that, no new revenue rates, some kind of catchphrase or something, because they just don't understand. But that's really a defined methodology by the state to define that word.
Yeah, so let me explain. So I don't want anybody thinking that we just calculate these rates on a whim. Y'all know, and it's included in your packets, and if anybody's listening to this, if you go online, you can see that in the budget packet, but it's called the Truth in Taxation form, and it's 16 pages now of it's basically a math formula where we have to plug in certain specified numbers in order to get to that no new revenue calculation and also to get to the voter approval rate calculation. So it's not something we make up. It's mandated by law. So, but yes, and then also just to clarify, but what is in effect now is if the council were to adopt a rate above the voter approval rate, then that triggers an automatic election. And if that rollback election were to pass, again, it rolls back to the no new revenue rate.
And we used to call that the effective tax rate.
Yes.
Before they changed the
I could
words.
not remember that. Thank you for saying effective tax rate and rollback rate. But at that time, those were significantly higher. So the effective tax rate was, I think, 3% or 4%, 3%, 3.5% on your current adopted rate, basically. You could go that, and then the rollback rate was 8%. So 8% on top of the effective rate.
Right. And then I was trying to remember the graphic that we had put up in the work session, and it was when the Grapevine, Keller, and North Richland Hills are the only ones that have no new revenue or lower, and that's all of Tarrant County or Tarrant and Dallas County? Was it just Tarrant County? Probably Tarrant and Dallas both, but.
It was for both Dallas and Tarrant.
It was that, okay, so just a reminder for those listening is that in all of Tarrant and Dallas County, 3 cities have had no new revenue rate or below 3 years in a row, and that is only Grapevine, Keller, and North Richland Hills at this point.
All right. So moving on, the other thing that that is a future consideration is it's a bond election in November. So as you know, there's 4 propositions that the Citizens Program Advisory Committee has recommended to place on the ballot for November. And again, the council will consider calling this election at the August 10th City Council meeting, and those are the propositions. that are recommended for those ballot measures. So we're looking at 1.45.97 million bond election, which is the largest in the history of our city. That impact would be our proposal. How we've calculated this is to issue that debt over 10 years, and that keeps the impact to the INS portion of the tax rate down to 2.5 cents, 2.5 cents. So again, that impact is just calculated on the INS portion of the tax rate. So one of the things that to be aware of is that in preparing to issue the $3 million in certificate of obligation bonds that you all have directed us to issue to replace the fire truck and ambulance, we have been in discussions with our bond rating agencies. And one of the things that they have keyed in on is this instability that's kind of being created in our property tax revenue situation, both by further constraints of the Texas legislature and by the appraisal district methodology, which there's also legislation that's proposed to be considered next session that would basically codify what Tarrant Appraisal District is doing, make it state law, but it would also proposes to have appraisals happen every 5 years only every 5 years instead of every 2 years. So it would just further compound the sort of instability in the property tax revenue. So what does that mean? Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because the bond rating agencies were clearly asking questions about our operational fund reserve revenue because they're concerned that the INS portion of the rate can't decrease because it can as your debt goes down, but it has to be set at the level that is needed to pay your debt payments. So what they see is as the property tax constraints continue to go further and further, that's pressure obviously on your operations rate. So they want to make sure that there's enough in city operations to cover any shortfalls on revenues that support our operations. So this is how we're responding to the instability in the revenues, which is one of the reasons why I have not recommended in the proposed budget to offset anything with drawing down reserves or with an appropriation of fund balance. So I've listed it here. Kind of the old thinking was cities needed to have sufficient reserves to support operations in a time of disaster or for emergency situations. The new perspective with the instability that's being created in our property tax revenues is that cities will need to maintain a high level of reserves to support operations as revenues that support operations become unstable. So as y'all know too, we have a very conservative fund balance policy. 33% I think is what we're required to keep in the general fund. But you also know that we have much higher reserve level than that at this time. And pretty much across all of our funds, we have a higher than required level of reserves. So I'm saying that to say that right now, I think they would view our level of reserves as sufficient, but in the future, we're gonna have to be cautious about appropriating fund balance to support operations in the budget. So a lot of things too, and I've separated out in the letter between recurring costs added to the budget and non-recurring, and that's one of the reasons, because you have to factor in that any recurring costs we're proposing to add to the budget, add that money in perpetuity where they're non-recurring or one-time costs. But so that talks a little bit about why the tax rate that we're proposing. One, it's higher than the adopted rate because our values are down, but two, it's because we're trying to prepare for the future to make sure that we have what we need to support our operations as our property tax revenues continue to decline.
So just kind of to add to what Paulette said, and just for clarity again for those listening, but if the bond rating is negatively impacted, that means our cost of borrowing goes up, which means your ability to borrow goes down, okay? So you can't afford things and it costs more to tax. The other is to just kind of put a finer point on the stability issue. That means what the legislature is currently doing is creating instability in the marketplace, requiring us to shift the thinking to more reserves. which is not normally what you would be thinking because we've always had good ones. And if you remember the accounting report we have every year, the accountants tell us you can bring those down because you're a lot higher than everybody else, especially from industry standards. So we're better there. The thing that's curious to me about the legislature and the property tax issue is every bond in this state, whether it be school or city, is secured by property taxes, which means if you eliminate them, all bonds go in default and would create a financial collapse. I'm just being finance right now. That would be a very interesting thing to do. I still try to figure out how you're going to bridge that with a document that's written that says what it's secured by is the future cash flows of a property tax revenue, right? And that you're going to get rid of it and say, well, you're going to trust the state to pay these bonds without the bonds going into default and basically creating a financial collapse. But that's just the math.
Okay, so with that doom and gloom, let's let's move on. So that's one of the reasons why this next year you're gonna see us embark on building our fiscal roadmap. And so what is this going to involve? This is going to involve understanding and knowing our true cost of services, developing cost recovery policies where they're appropriate, reviewing all fees and charges for service to ensure cost recovery, creating multi-year budgets and long-term forecasts so that we can see where we have shortfalls and try to address and prepare for those in the future by what we're doing today. And you'll see later on in Chase's presentation, he goes through the long-term forecasts. And then just kind of a reminder, it kind of gets us, we're all on the same bus, and this gets us all on the same bus in preparing for the future and preserving the safety, stability, and quality of life in our city. Oh, I'll skip that one. So you've noted probably by now that our budget conversation looks much different this year than it's looked in previous years. And that is because we need to focus on our true cost of services, cost recovery, cost reductions, in order to maintain a reasonable property tax rate to preserve the safety, stability, and quality of life we now enjoy. And also looking at how do we fund more things from sources other than property tax. And I know, I'm a taxpayer too, right? So everybody wants their property tax rate cuts. But no one, I don't think, would say that they want to cut the safety, stability, and quality of life that we enjoy here in NRH. And the problem with that is that the property tax is what funds your public safety primarily. So you can see this very simple pie graph here that basically shows in the general fund, our proposed revenues, 48% of those come from property tax, 52% come from all other sources, and in our expenses, 60% of our expenses in the general fund go to public safety, and 40% fund everything else. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the property tax doesn't even fund all of our public safety, and that every other service in the city is funded by a source other than property taxes. So again, like I just said, property taxes fund most of public safety, police, fire, and EMS. Some police services are funded by the half-cent sales tax for crime prevention, and then all other city services are funded from other sources of revenue. Get to my notes so I don't forget to say something. So keeping our funding steady is exactly what allows us to protect these core areas in our upcoming budget. Keeping our police and fire departments fully staffed, updating our programs and amenities, taking care of roads, supporting commercial vitality. And over the last 5 years, even as we steadily pulled our tax rate down, our residents have actually enjoyed increases and gains in the total service value. But these core services, like I mentioned, is public safety, but also providing water, treating sewage, collecting the trash, The stability and quality of life pieces are maintaining and improving city streets, code enforcement to maintain our neighborhoods, building inspections, animal services, and then providing parks, trails, and recreation amenities, and library services and programs, and then community events. And then the commercial vitality is what supports the grocery stores that people need, restaurants, entertainment venues, and the businesses and industries that establish themselves in our city. And so this previous slide asked, what is the return on investment? And is trying to make the point that we really need to begin to think of our property tax payments as investments in the stability, safety, and quality of life that we have. And the return on investment is delivering community. And I think all these pictures show all the various ways in which we deliver community to the citizens of North Richland Hills. From public safety to public works, to parks, library, all of those community events that are heavily attended. And I'll remind you that in the past, our citizens in surveys have said that when you ask them what services they would like to see cut, there are 0 services that they would like to see cut. So with that, to quote Chase Fossey, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Paulette. Mayor, City Council, staff. Interesting noticing that we have a very healthy city staff and flat insurance premiums. I had to notice that city management has denied all of staff any candy in front of their space, and it's fortified in front of So just a little icebreaker, just to refresh or get your mind going. But what do economists, wastewater technicians, and trash collectors all have in common? Well, they all handle gross domestic product. Just an observation year over year as far as our economy, and some of these are very fluid numbers, but I just want to brief you on how we're doing locally from an economic perspective. Unemployment is considered at an equilibrium level of 4%. It's a little up from prior year, a little less than overall region, but when you compare us to the highest state at this point, we're well below 1% of our friends in California. Inflation is a mixed bag. It's slightly up year over year, but we remain to be lower than the national city average, largely due to our gas rates, our gas price of gasoline. But you can see that even though those gas, energy, and medical is slightly up, believe it or not, groceries do feel like they're a lot. Same with restaurants. They haven't increased that much year over year, even though they increased the previous year. Consumer expenditures, a really good story for us, nearing 7% year over year. Keep in mind when we peel back that onion, brick and mortars, our businesses are flat. They're the ones employing people, paying rent, paying property taxes, yet they're flat. Food service and entertainment's up. We'll get into that in a sec. And it's because of that e-commerce, and it continues to increase. I think we're all guilty of it. I am for sure. 35% now of our local taxable sales is driven through mail order e-commerce. Federal funds rate, I think some of us watch this very closely. It's currently at 3.6%, slightly down year over year, even though they haven't made many decisions since then. The current 30-year mortgage is at 6.4%. And just recently, they voted, I think with 3 dissents, to keep the rates the same, although there might be a possible increase later on this year. And our consumer confidence is flat, 0%. Even though it was up just as recent as March, it went back down to flat because of things going on in the Middle East. Paulette mentioned some of the new construction values to our tax rolls. I want to give you a little bit of briefing on our development trends. You'll notice that Fiscal year 2024 was a banner year for NRH. You can see the number of permits issued by the categories there. Last year, we started to see a slowdown, and this year we continue that slowdown with a projection here of 232 permits issued total, and you can see the breakdown between remodels and new single family. Commercial remains steady. A lot of that's due to your guidance and direction for staff to really have a focus on that. This is a repeat slide from last year showing the 9 subdivisions that are currently under development right now. We do have a good pipeline of new single family. Last year, that available lots and pending was in the 550 range. We're at 500. And really, there's been little activity even though there is a pipeline, and that's because of a couple factors that I was able to research through industry trades. First is the high interest rates. Not only are they impacting purchasing power from buyers, but also higher financing costs from builders. So builders are not wanting to do those construction loans as well. Second, unsold inventory. Right now, builders are focusing on clearing their completed spec homes and closing out existing subdivisions versus starting the new ones. And then finally, the shift towards capital of build-to-rent communities. Construction capital is quickly diverting over to this new segment of residential called BTR, which allows the builders and investors to bypass the buyer financing hurdles. We currently don't have any BTR communities in our pipeline, nor do we expect to see any, but you see those on the ex-urban areas of our region. So with that said, existing single-family values, I mean, you saw some charts here that they have risen rapidly. A lot of those with new homes that are exceeding $600,000 in value. We are in a very stable and nearly balanced single-family part of the region where buyers and sellers do have equal leverage. And within North Richland Hills, we are known as a highly competitive micro market. So if you do see a home that's listed and it's competitively priced and in good condition, it really gets under contract within days. Interesting story is our multifamily. The market is oversupplied. I think there's questions we get about the Wheelhouse project across from the Tex Rail station. It's because there's too much supply right now in the market. And I peeled back that onion and noticed that there have been over 3,500 single or apartment units delivered in the mid-cities just over the past 3 years, with 0 in North Richland Hills. So what that has done is that has provided additional supply, mostly in the Haltom City and Fossil Creek area, alongside a couple projects in Euless. But what that's done is actually lowered the rates in our multifamily complexes throughout the city, and you can see that year over year rates have dropped. And then when you peel back that onion deeper, our newest, the Delegate, developed in 2024, juxtaposed against 8,500 Harwood, everybody is dropping rates, again with that hyper supply. Commercial, the story here is it's pretty steady. Our vacancy rates have hovered at historic lows and continue to be at that rate, especially in retail, and in office is a little higher just because of that, again, working from home element. Story here is industrial. While it's a story, it's not a big story, but our rate shrunk from 12% down to 8% due to the addition of Sunair products in the former ADI, Southwest ADI building off of Browning Street, that industrial park near Tyson. I won't mention the W street name it's on. The story here is our year-over-year taxable sales. Chase will talk to this as well, but we're up almost 7% and we're exceeding inflation. While our local brick and mortar is flat and our e-commerce is up, retail, restaurants, and attractions, they make up the bulk of our local tax base. The good news is that I think with the community support programs implemented by City Council, we've seen an increase not only in fast food from a taxable sales standpoint, but we are net positive and sit down. And according to the National Restaurant Association, they still are seeing headwinds. In fact, traffic is down 2% across the country when it comes to sitting down, waiting for a server, having to tip a server, and spending, an hour to get your food versus driving through a drive-through. Story for us, very fortunately, is our attraction and entertainment segment of taxable sales has increased dramatically. You can see the previous year we almost doubled, and this year we're almost doubling it again thanks to the new additions of Malibu Jacks and Peppa Pig. So excited that we're leaning into that, and hopefully we'll continue to grow that revenue stream as we move forward. So business trends, I share this chart going all the way back to 2020 as a reminder of how dire the business community was across the country, but also in NRH, where we saw a drop in new business startups, but also a net negative in businesses to the amount of 16. Over time, you can see that boomerang effect in 2021 and 2022. And slowly you see that we did celebrate and announce that we hit that 100 mark of new businesses this past year. I'm projecting by the end of this year end, we'll have about 89, with a net, though, however, a positive 53. Restaurants remain a strategic priority. We have a strong pipeline. And again, using this placer data that many of us use at staff, we've seen a 2% increase in foot traffic in all of our food service places, again with that National Restaurant Association 2% decline. Happy to share some of these are either forthcoming or have recently opened. Paulette made mention of the restaurant park on Davis. Most of these have already been announced or are in progress. And I'm happy to report that August 10th, your next council meeting, you'll have the opportunity to approve another one off Precinct Line, in addition to one that we've been recently discussing that is in the works next to La Madeleine. From a retail and primary employment standpoint, what's interesting is that we've seen employer additions, 3 unique retailers, and 1 community-driven business retention. Very little work was done by my department to retain the Painted Tree operation. It was a surprise to many of the communities around the country that saw their abrupt closure, but the community drove the retention of that business, and now what's called the Hive Collective. We continue to foster adaptive reuse, redevelopment, and revitalization, and you can see here some of those primary employers and retailers that recently opened. So in conclusion, economic indicators are going sideways, as you saw a lot of yellow on that chart. Inflation is slightly up, but differs across sectors. We have a huge single-family pipeline of over 500 lots, but the developers aren't in a hurry to build. So what you see here is a graphic of what I think is the term of today. It's a big nothing burger that we have going on in the community. On the flip side, we do have new attractions taking hold with the increase in taxable sales. We have signature commercial projects that are in progress, and these single-family builders can't wait forever. They're paying debt. They have to start soon. So what you have in front of us is a Six Sigma lean hamburger with the lettuce, the fat-free cheese, and the turkey patty. But instead of a nothing burger, we're building a nice quality lean hamburger. That concludes my presentation. Any questions? And I'll pass it forward to Patrick.
Any questions? Doesn't look like it. I think we're going to take a quick recess right now. Let's say about 10 minutes. And it is 9:54. We will recess the City Council Budget Work Session. Let's reconvene the City Council Budget Work Session at 10:06.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council, staff. To follow along with what Craig was saying, Craig, I don't know that you knew this, but you see that there's no candy in front of staff, but what you don't know is the police department is going to be putting rowing machines in the front, in the entryway. So, Jeff's not even here. Oh, well. Oh, well, so, yeah. Okay, well, he's on the track. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to present this morning, as I always get a chance to do. I love talking about city staff and kind of how things are going within employment with the city. And we've had some exciting things happen over this last year with the top workplaces awards recognition, and I think there's going to be some more recognition coming. Just a little teaser there of what everyone's going to find out a little bit later on. But one of the things each year that I like to do is kind of to begin my presentation looking at, from a very high level, how things are going at the city and, kind of employee morale and engagement. And probably the best way to do that is to look at kind of our turnover from about 30,000 foot level. So you can see we're projecting this year our turnover to be a little bit under our 10-year average of about 13%. So nothing is really alarming to us. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and their analysis of turnover related to government employment, most government employers have around 17 to 18% turnover. So compared to other forms of government, we're doing pretty well. Things are looking pretty good. So to drill down a little bit deeper, compared to the turnover, we also do track why employees are leaving us. And we do that through an exit survey that the vast majority of employees get when they leave. There are some that for certain circumstances may not get an exit survey, but we do like to know and stay on top of why our employees leaving us. One of the things that Paulette did mention in her presentation is that we were seeing some employees starting to leave, not so much for pay, but also for the additional benefits that they might find in other governmental entities or in the private sector related to leave and working hours, things like that. So if you look at this year compared to last year, we're noticing a few more employees leave for other governmental agencies, or perhaps they accepted another job for personal reasons, but you can see here retirements are about the same as they've been in years past. Nothing stands out there, but we are, through the exit surveys, are starting to kind of see some employees leave for a number of different reasons other than just pay, which is, I think, what most people think about when you see some turnover. Getting a little bit more detailed, you can see separations by department. Police, Public Works, again, we see some separations there, but I might point out over this last year, in the police department, we've seen some more of our non-sworn employees leave as opposed to the sworn employees leave. So that's a little bit different than in years past. Public Works, again, a lot of times you're going to see with your field technical staff, you're going to see individuals leave for pay because it's a very competitive market right now as far as construction is going. So nothing is really standing out. We do share the exit surveys with the department, so we let them know kind of what employees are saying as they leave, so that we can make changes if changes are necessary. So it's a really good way for us to kind of stay on top of how things are going out with our workforce. Also, this is, to me, an interesting slide because what this shows is about half of our employees leave employment with the city within the first 2 years. So that's where we see a lot of our turnover. This is consistent with previous years and slides that I've shown. One of the things that I would mention here that we've recently implemented to address this is beginning in January, we started doing onboarding surveys. So each employee, after they have been in employment after 6 months, they get an onboarding survey asking how the process went with HR, how's the process going related to training, engagement within the department, and we seek their feedback so we can improve the process or we can improve the onboarding process. And this is something that the Links U group is also reviewing right now is that onboarding process. Is there anything that we can do to bring these numbers down? If we can get them past 2 years of employment, then we have a higher retention rate after that. So this is important to us. Also, another key indicator as to how things going, are we able to attract good employees? And here's a list of key positions that we were able to hire this year. I won't go over all of them, but we've got Stephen, our new finance director, very fortunate to have him. Civil engineer is going to be coming on board very soon. We are continuing to be able to recruit police officers, so I included that in the list. So some of you might recall several years ago that was very difficult for city employers to recruit police officers, but we have seen that improve. So we're able to continue to go out and find good quality employees. But I kind of want to transition into employee pay and compensation, and talk a little bit about how our compensation, wage and salary administration is set up, and then talk more about our recommendations for employee compensation for next year. So we have two types of pay plans that our employees are in, our positions are in. We have a general government pay plan, which is our non-sworn employees, and those are what is called, they're in open ranges, and I'm going to give an example of what that looks like in a second. And then our public safety, our sworn positions, are what is called, they're on step plans. That is very consistent with all other public safety, city, police and fire departments. Everybody's on a step plan, so that's consistent with what other cities are doing. So each year we conduct a compensation survey where we go out and we ask 17 cities, which we believe to be comparable cities, what it is that they did with their pay plans, both the general services and the public safety pay plan each year. You can see the cities here that we compare with. This was these cities were selected based on meetings between HR, city manager's office, police and fire employee groups. We all met years ago and came up with this group of cities based on, things that the reason for selection is location, scope of services, population size, budget size. So we wanted to be a good comparable list of cities. Scope of services, there may be some cities you would think that are close to us that might be on here. I would use the scope of services as an example. For the fire department, what we're looking for there is fire departments where their employees are firefighters and paramedics, as opposed to maybe a fire department where they contract fire services out. So we're wanting to have good matches with other cities. So this is the 17 cities that we have selected and maintained for a number of years. On the general government side, the survey that we did in May showed that the other cities moved employee pay. About 3% was an average increase. That could have been a combination of merit increase, could have been lump sum, could have been a cost of living adjustment. But on average, employee salaries moved on the general government side about 3%. This is what we did this year. This is what was approved by council last year. We did a 3% range adjustment for general services. That was effective October 1, as well as a 3% merit increase plus a 1% pay for performance. Last year was the first year for our pay for performance program. One of the things that I thought was really kind of interesting is we have a system where it's the rating scale is a 5 rating scale. It goes from 1 to 5, and I was kind of curious what things were going to look like when we moved to a pay for performance system. And you'll see here that the department supervisors did a really good job of maintaining what I think is very accurate performance evaluations. The average increase or score averages were relatively the same from 25 to 24. I thought it was very well received, and we're recommending obviously that we continue that pay performance program this year, as well as we did a few adjustments to some individual positions. This year, what we're proposing is doing a 2% range adjustment effective October 1, and then continuing the pay for performance plan where that base merit is 2%. So anybody who meets expectations gets a 2%. And then if you're fall into the exceeds category, you would get an additional 1% or 3%. One thing I would point out too, yes, anyone who doesn't get or gets a below expectations, there is now a requirement that that individual be put on a performance improvement plan. So we do have a standard format for that, and we had a few last year that were put on that PIP. So the general government pay plan, the structure looks like this. These are the individuals that are in open ranges. You have positions that are assigned to pay grades, and each pay grade has a minimum salary range and then a maximum. And employees are inserted into this pay range, and they can move freely between the minimum and the maximum. So we have roughly, I think, about 140 different individual positions, both general government and sworn within the city. So this is what an example of what a pay plan and the pay grades would look like. So the way individuals move through this open range through performance increases, I'll use this example here of a secretary who is in the pay grade 913, and you see the minimum and the maximum. So the salary of this individual is $39,400 as of September 30. So it falls within, right above the minimum of the pay grade. Increase at the evaluation of October 1st, a 3% increase. Let's say this individual gets that. The new salary would be $40,500, some change. Next year, if we were to do an additional 3%, just as an example, then this individual's salary would go to $41,800. So you can see individuals are placed within this pay range and they move freely, eventually making it to the top of the pay range as they continue to be employed. Pay range adjustments a little bit different. So you have the merit increases, which are there to incentivize employees for good performance, and then you adjust pay ranges to make sure that our ranges are comparable or competitive with our benchmark cities. So we have 42 positions that we consider benchmark positions, and these are going to be positions that are very common among municipal employers, accountants, librarians. These are just an example of a few. So we go out and we compare with these 17 cities. We look at the pay ranges, and we look at the midpoints of the pay ranges, and we look at where our midpoints are at, and we do a comparison, and we look at, are we ahead, are we below, based on the midpoint. So we look at the midpoint and we decide what we're going to do with our ranges, and the recommendation this year again is to move the ranges 2%. So an example of what a pay range adjustment would look like using our secretary example, again the salary of about $40,582, you can see where this individual is within our pay plan. When we adjust the ranges 2%, you'll see that the minimum and the maximum move, but the employee salary stays the same. So we just adjust the ranges, and the employee salary doesn't necessarily move, but we're making sure those ranges are competitive with other cities. So that's the general government pay plan. Anybody have any questions before I move to the step plan? Okay. So looking at the public safety pay plans, just a reminder of what we did this year. We've got police and fire, two separate pay plans. Police sworn, we increased the pay range is 3% for them. October of last year, and then April they got a step increase, and I'm going to give an example of what this looks like. Fire, same thing, 3% range increase, and then all ranks were given a step increase of April of this year. So one of the things that we do with our police and fire positions is we actually survey all the different ranks. But I've given an example here of our police and fire. I'm going to give an example of our police and fire and what those pay ranges have done over the last several years as far as movement of our competitors. And so I'm going to use the police officer as an example. So unlike the general services where we're comparing midpoints, on police and fire, we're actually looking at the maximum, that top step. That's these numbers that you see here. These are the top steps. Averages of the other cities. So you'll see that over the last several years, of those 17 cities, for the police officer salaries or pay ranges, they've moved about 4%, maybe a little bit over 4%. So you can see kind of the growth, the salary ranges, and I'm going to get a little bit more detail in just a second, but this is for police. You can kind of see what the movement has been on the police side. Fire has been kind of similar. You can see the growth with the fire, the maximum of the pay ranges, with what growth we've seen with our comparison cities. And what I'm showing here is I'm showing kind of similar information, the growth of the police officer market as far as the movement to the STEP plan and the firefighter market. And if you go back to 2020, you'll see some years maybe the police market moved a little bit ahead of the fire market. For example, in 2024, police officer, we saw the ranges move about 3%, firefighter about 3.5%. But you'll notice that over the years, they tend to kind of move the same. It just could be depending on maybe some recruitment challenges, what the market's doing. But then I'm also comparing what have we done? What has the city council approved? What have we done related to our police officer and firefighter salaries? So this is a history going back to 2020. You can see to really maintain our position with the market, we've kind of had to do a little bit better than the average. So very much appreciative of the investment that the community has and council has given to make sure that our salaries on the police officer and firefighter side are competitive. So this is what it looks like for all the different ranks. Like I said, we survey all of the different ranks, and you'll see we're a little bit behind on most of the ranks with the exception of the police officer, a little bit ahead. Everything is this. If you were to go back and look at the information from previous years, you're going to see a trend similar to this. So looking at where we're at now in 2026 compared to my presentation last year and where we were at last year, you can see we lost a little bit of ground on a few of the positions, primarily firefighter and fire driver engineer, but not bad. Everything's, we're doing okay. We're still very competitive. So this is a slide that I show each year because what council has adopted for many years is we try to maintain our police officer and firefighter salaries with what we call the market average. And this yellow box is and has been considered our market average for years. So we're trying to stay within here. As you can imagine, cities are moving every year. They're adjusting their ranges differently. Now this is 2025. I'm going to show 2026 in just a second, but this is 2025. But what you're going to see here is these percentages show what cities have done as far as adjusting their ranges. So you'll see last year the Colony adjusted their ranges 10% compared to Flower Mound, who didn't adjust their ranges at all. So we're trying to maintain this market average. So this is police officer for 2025. In 2026, this is the most recent survey data. You can see that based on what cities, the adjustments city made this year, we had two cities that just kind of jumped over us just a little bit, but we're within what we consider to be this market average. You can see this year, Duncanville wanted to make up some ground. And then also I would point out these numbers here. So this is the city of Keller. The maximum of their police officer is $91,146. You go up here to Allen, and their maximum is $113,000. So there's a pretty significant range between these cities. And here we are at this market average. So that's police officer. We do the same thing for fire. You can see for fire last year, we were within what we would consider to be our market average. This year, again, still within what we consider to be our market average and where we're trying to maintain. So this goes to our recommendation for this fiscal year. We are proposing an October range adjustment of 3% for all of the ranks in both police department and fire department, and then also a step increase April 1st of 2027. The step increase is tied to a merit system. So it's not just an automatic step increase. It's similar to the merit increase that our general services get. For an employee to get a step increase in police and fire, it's not a completely tenured-based system. They have to pass a performance evaluation. If they don't get at least a meet standard, they're not going to move or advance to the next step. So I just wanted to point that out. So this is an example using a 5-year police officer of what movement in the pay range will be like for next year. So you'll see under this example, we have a police officer who's at step 5 as of September 30th. You can see what their salary is there. So when we adjust ranges 3% in October, you'll see that they stay on step 5, but we adjust the ranges 3%. So there is a pay increase just due to the fact that we increased the ranges. And then April, assuming that there is a good performance evaluation, this individual will move to step 6 and they'll move to the top of the range. So that's how an individual progresses through a step plan. Same example for fire. Step 5, 96,402. We adjust ranges 3%, a little bit over 100,000, and then April, assuming at least it meets expectation, it's 103,000 will be the top of the range. So I was looking at previously pay grades and comparing pay grades. What this pie chart does is this actually, we were looking at actual salaries here. So this isn't a pay grade. This is where all of our police and fire, all of our employees are at within a pay range. And I have it broken down by sworn and by non-sworn. So you can see, as far as actual salaries are concerned, police and fire, you have 96% of our police and firefighters earn a base salary of over $80,000. You can see with the vast majority earning over 100,000 plus. On the general services side, you've got half of our employees that are earning about less than $60,000. So this is just gives you an idea of, we're not talking pay ranges anymore, we're talking actual salaries and where our employees are at within those pay ranges. So I'm about to move to health insurance, but I would want to just stop and see if there's any questions regarding our recommendations for
Go ahead,
pay.
Kelly. Good presentation so far. Just a couple of questions for you. On those 17 cities for comparison, I know we've been using those for years. How often do we reevaluate that? Because I know like Frisco 10 years ago was vastly different than Frisco is today.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to evaluate it. We do look at it each year to just see if there's been any significant changes within the city. One of the things that we do also that I think is equally important is we're always looking at changing our benchmark positions too, because that's where you're going to see some changes. We change job descriptions quite a bit sometimes, and not necessarily job titles, so we want to make sure that there's a good match with other cities. But to answer your question, we've had this 17 city, I think, since about 2014.
Okay. And then the pay for performance and the exceeds, really like that we're doing that. Is there a certain percentage that a manager gets as far as exceeds employees? Because everybody always thinks their team is the best. So it's like, okay, well, everybody on my team is, exceeds, they're going to get that extra bump.
No, if I'm understanding you correctly, no, there's no additional incentive for supervisors who their employees may get all and exceeds. Is that?
No. Does the supervisor necessarily say, everybody on my team, I've got 5 people that work for me, everybody's exceeds, so they're going to get that extra bump? Or is it capped out at a certain percentage of their employees?
No, everybody, so the way that we budget is everybody's going to be eligible for that 3%. So there's no, and again, I apologize if I'm not understanding, there's no.
Yeah, we don't limit the number of exceeds that people can give, and how we budget is based on what Patrick showed as like historical trends of ratings. And so, so we don't limit it, but we also, just from that trend number of how many, the average score on the evaluation, what that's showing you is that average score is about a meets. It's somewhere in between a meets and exceeds. So people haven't adjusted the way they're evaluating. They're not evaluating people higher than they would have before, if that makes sense. Okay. So, but no, we don't limit and say you can only give this many people and exceeds expectation.
That's it.
Okay.
Anybody else? Couple things on. Do you do on the total package too versus your neighbors? Because my presumption is our health insurance is probably cheaper since it's held.
We
the price
do.
for
We
3
do a
years in row.
comprehensive benefit survey about every 2 years, as opposed to, we don't do a benefit survey every year like we do on the compensation side. But yes, we do.
Yeah.
We do look at health insurance premiums, co-insurance, out-of-pocket maximums, individual deduct, things like that to see.
Yeah.
Make
That'd
sure
be
we're-
good to see on there too, especially just the out-of-pocket premiums versus your neighbors on the scale on where you show up. And then my other question is when, because I think a couple of years ago when we were talking, the issue about hiring was more about qualifications and not about money. That the available pool of those qualified was significantly lower than what we were willing to accept. So how often is it? Are you bidding against a supply and demand issue that may actually it's just really a qualifications issue versus a money issue? It's always a money issue. I get that part, but it's
Money is important, but I would say that any of the challenges that we have faced in the years past were certainly not related to money. There may be a time here or there that we have lost someone to money, but generally it is someone leaving the profession as a whole. And then conversely, we were facing challenges several years ago. It was due to a limited pool. It was following the COVID years, the George Floyd years. The number of people that were interested in public safety was significantly diminished, and we're seeing that come back around. So,
okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, I might point out as well, this to what Jeff was saying, this last police officer test, we had 75 individuals sign up, whereas several years ago, we were taking them one at a time when they would come in and want to apply. So we have seen that market move in a much more positive direction over the last couple of years.
On the general government side, one of the things related to that, you saw that last year we implemented a program through LinkedIn to increase our recruitment efforts. And I think that what the feedback we're getting is that from the directors is that that's really improved our candidate pool for all of our positions.
Pipeline.
Yeah. So.
Yes, that's been a tremendous help, I think, especially for some of these unique positions. Civil engineer has been kind of challenging to go out and actually find candidates as opposed to them having to find us. So that's been helpful. So on the health insurance side, this is just a reminder of what we did last year. Last year we were able to do a premium holiday for our employees in September because of the good claims experience. We did not increase any allocation in last year's budget or this year's budget to the city. And then there were no increases to employee premiums or medical plan design this calendar year. And this year we do anticipate ending slightly under budget than what we budgeted. So we do have 3 health plans, and this is interesting to me. We actually began our HSA about 4 years ago, and we've seen each year HSAs, health savings accounts, have been around for a long time. This was actually something we had several employees that requested this, but as expected, each year it's kind of growing a little bit more. We're seeing some transition from the HRH or HSA account. Also, this slide I like to present each year because this shows how we have been budgeting compared to the actuals, where our total claims cost has ended up each year. This blue line here is where we begin the budget each year, and then the green is where we actually ended up. You can see right here after kind of the COVID years when everything related to healthcare kind of shut down. And then this year we're going to finish up right at about budget. Talk a little bit about this. So you'll see this spike here. Last year we had one claim that was over $4 million. So that's why you'll see this spike here. And I do want to point out that related to large claims, we have actually 2 forms of insurance that protects the city's fund from paying a large amount out during bad years. One form of protection is called our individual stop-loss insurance. So we actually go out and we pay for insurance that will pay large claims, anything in excess of $150,000. So even though we had a $4 million large claim, the city's expense was only $150,000. The insurance paid all the amount above that. So we do have protection on an individual claim basis as well as an aggregate basis. We pay for another form of insurance called aggregate stop-loss insurance, which if our plan were to have a really bad year and have a lot of losses, then once we reach this cap, this total cap, this payout, then insurance will pay at an aggregate level in case we ever reach that. So we have two forms of protection for our self-insurance fund in case we have a year where we might have either a large loss, a catastrophic type claim, or just an accumulation of large claims. This looks like, and typically what has been the most impactful on our plans in the years past has been large claim losses. And so we track this pretty closely. You'll see here we're running about $3.5 million. These are claims anything that exceeds $25,000. And then you'll see here this last year, the reason for that spike was that one claim of over $4.1 million. So everything seems to be trending kind of like back to normal. Going forward, we're not proposing any increase this year to the city's allocation, or city's funding for employee health insurance, and no increase to employee premiums or plan design changes for 2027, with the exception of partnering with North Hills Family Medical effective January. So that's it for my presentation. I'd be happy to respond to any other questions.
If we're keeping the premiums flat, right? And
yes, sir.
Did we do that last year as well?
We did.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. And the year before.
And the year before. Yes. All right. Thank you all.
All right. Good morning, Mayor and City Council. The presentation I'm about to deliver has never been included in the full-day budget work session before. It was created in response to the City Council's goal of stewarding the public's money well, but also City Council's request for staff to adopt a long-term perspective when considering the city's finances. I hope you find it helpful and insightful. To start, I borrowed this slide from Paulette's presentation, since it does a great job of explaining a concept that has a substantial impact on the long-range financial forecast: expiring increment. The actions taken by City Council over the last few years to reduce property taxes, plus limitations imposed by state law, have created an expiring increment representing $647,000 in potential property tax revenue. Put plainly, if this amount is included in the tax rate City Council adopts for 2027, it becomes a part of tax rate calculations for the city in the future, preserving flexibility. If this amount is not included in the tax rate adopted for fiscal year 27, this increment is lost forever. Future no new revenue rates and voter approval rates will permanently generate $647,000 less in property tax than they otherwise would have, unless City Council calls an election for voters to vote on the tax rate. Before I jump into the forecast, I'd like to provide a little more context. The city has been able to maintain service levels while adopting a tax rate at or below the no new revenue rate over the past 3 years by putting our fund balances to work. This slide shows how the fund balance for all of the city's capital funds added together has changed since fiscal year 2023. While each individual fund has limitations on what revenue can be spent on, this consolidation is helpful to see how things have changed over time. The 2027 budget, as proposed, will continue to convert capital reserves into projects that benefit the community, ending next fiscal year with 48% of the resources that were available in 2023. This slide conveys the same information, but for the city's operating funds. In comparison to the city's capital funds, utilization on the operating side has been far less, including growing the fund balance as recent as fiscal year 2024. However, in order to balance the 2026 adopted and 2027 proposed budgets, these operating fund balances have begun to be spent down as well. While every fund in the proposed budget complies with the city's minimum fund balance requirements, monitoring this trajectory is important for ensuring the long-term fiscal health of the organization. I'll now begin to walk you through the financial forecast for the next 5 years, starting with expenditures.
Can I ask a quick question? Just
Yes,
so
sir.
I get clarification. And when you're looking at the capital fund versus the operating funds are the ones that everybody's looking at from a ratings perspective, not the capital funds, right?
So that is where the emphasis tends to be. Like when we had those rating calls recently, if you compare the balances, the sum total balances within the operating funds is substantially larger than the capital, but they still do look at the capital as well, but it's not where the emphasis is.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks.
All right, so going back to the financial forecast, starting with expenditures, all numbers in the fiscal year 2027 column come from the proposed budget. The first step in our forecast is to project baseline expenditures. In other words, how are all of the items that are already in the city's budget expected to change over time? For this analysis, we assume salaries and benefits will increase about 3% year over year, which is what we have seen over the last few fiscal years. All other expenditures are expected to increase according to inflation, which, according to the Federal Reserve, is estimated to be between 2.7 and 2.4% over the next 5 years. Finally, there are one-time expenses included in the 2027 proposed budget that are removed from the forecast for future years. Next, the forecast adds in planned service enhancements and increasing costs. Historically, $1 million annually has been allocated from the general fund for street maintenance, with additional investments funded through debt or reserves. This forecast assumes an additional $3 million annually from the general fund to preserve the $4 million annual investment the city has made in recent years. Healthcare budget increases are not projected for next fiscal year, but they are starting in 2028. For fleet sustainability, the recently completed fleet efficiency study indicated that the general fund is contributing approximately $2 million less per year than needed to maintain appropriate vehicle replacement timeframes, and recommended correcting this. This forecast assumes we would start implementing this recommendation in 2028, with sustainable funding levels fully implemented by 2031. Next, the city's contract with Trinity Metro TexRail includes a built-in cost increase of 5% each year until 2035, at which point the annual amount switches to 3/8 of 1 cent of our total sales tax revenue. Finally, the city has applied for a grant that would provide funding to hire the staff necessary to operate a 5th full-time ambulance. This grant, if awarded, would help meet the growing needs of the community, but does come with a cash match obligation that would start in 2028. The final step for expenditures is to add together baseline expenditures with service enhancements and increasing costs. You can see forecasted expenditures from the general fund based on these assumptions are expected to increase from $69.6 million to $72.3 million in 2028. Now that you can see how the forecast works, here is how those same assumptions play out for expenditures over the next 5 years. Each year is around $3 million more than the previous year. I'll give you just a second to absorb this information. All right, we'll now move on to the forecast for revenues other than property tax in the general fund. To keep it top of mind, I have copied over total expenditures from the previous slide. Looking at anticipated revenue from non-property tax sources, sales tax revenue is expected to grow 0.5% faster than inflation, meaning 3.2 to 2.9% annual growth. All other non-property tax revenue, including licenses, permits, charges for service, fines, etc., are expected to increase 3% each year. There's no one-time revenue included in the proposed 27 budget, but if we were to appropriate fund balance this year, that's where it would go so that it could be backed out from future years. These revenue items added together give us a revenue subtotal. Finally, we calculate the remainder that is left over if you subtract non-property tax revenue from total expenditures within the general fund. Ideally, this would be the amount to generate from property tax. Now that you see how this slide works, here is how those same assumptions play out over the next 5 years. While non-property tax revenue does grow by approximately $1 million annually, it is not expected to keep pace with the growth in expenditures, meaning that the remainder grows in each subsequent year. Now I'm just going to acknowledge at this point, this has been a lot of numbers. I'm getting towards the end. Stay with me. The remainder from the previous slide has been brought forward onto this slide. Again, this is the amount that would ideally come from property tax based on all of the model's assumptions in order to balance the budget. We'll first look at the impact of the tax rate options that Paulette presented earlier on fiscal year 2027 revenue. The city manager's proposed budget includes a proposed tax rate that is below the voter approval rate, but that includes the expiring increment discussed earlier. This generates exactly the amount of revenue needed to balance the 2027 budget as presented. If City Council wants to adopt a rate higher or lower than the city manager's recommendation, staff have suggested adjustments that could be made to street maintenance and or appropriation of fund balance levels to balance next year's budget. The point here is that there are multiple ways to balance the budget for fiscal year 27. However, mentioned earlier that the adopted tax rate for fiscal year 27 will have a substantial impact on the long-term financial forecast. This is my last slide, and it illustrates this point. For the City Council's consideration, 2 scenarios have been created to illustrate what the range of potential options may look like moving forward. The first scenario aims high, showing how much revenue would be generated if the city adopts the voter approval rate every year after 27. The second scenario aims low, showing how much revenue would be generated if the city adopts the no new revenue rate every year after 27. Within each of these scenarios, I'll present 2 sets of numbers. What the scenario looks like if the expiring increment is used in 2027, and what the scenario looks like if the expiring increment is lost forever. What happens to the increment in 2027 has a substantial impact on 2028. Both of the numbers you are looking at here assume the voter approval rate in 2028. The only difference is what happened in 2027. While the 28 budget would be balanced if the increment is used in 27 scenario, there's nearly a $600,000 deficit if the increment is lost. This difference compounds over time. Again, all of these numbers assume the voter approval rate each year. The only difference is what happened in 2027. This analysis also shows that regardless of the scenario chosen, the city has work to do to keep the budget balanced in the future under the given assumptions. Finally, the numbers in scenario 2 play out the same way, but assume the no new revenue rate is adopted each year after 2027. While all numbers in this scenario result in deficits, the impact of what occurs in 2027 is still apparent. Before concluding, I would like to end with a few disclaimers. Any of the assumptions presented in this analysis could be wrong, but they do represent the best effort of staff to present a plausible view of the future. All spending decisions are subject to City Council direction. We also cannot predict what the state legislature may do to change the rules, including in ways that would fundamentally break this forecast. Our goal in putting this together was not to scare anyone, pretend to know the future, or argue for any particular position, but instead illustrate the long-term mathematical impact that 1 year's property tax rate will have on the future, based on the legal framework the state of Texas has provided to us. Again, I do hope you find this information helpful. That concludes my presentation. Happy to answer questions.
Any questions? So even though we're showing the reduction in the amount that we're spending on roads, in the summary and what Paulette had said, still there's 7.5 million available, right, for road maintenance?
Correct. In 27, yes.
Yeah, in 27. Okay, or whatever we don't spend, it stays in a fund and goes beyond that too.
Yeah, so if we go to, I just want to bring it back to the expenditure slide.
And I think based on what we spent this year, which was the 6.3 million, I believe we probably near capacity in our ability to spend and manage that kind of number without hiring additional people to help do that. I'm surmising, I'm just guessing in that, so.
Yep. So yeah, just to clarify, the street investments within the proposed budget would be captured in part under that one-time expenditures line. That's removed from future years. But then again, the model does assume that we would maintain a $4 million investment level for each of those 4 years. Again, bring me back to that disclaimer. You know, City Council has full control over all of those spending forward. Any other questions?
Just to add, so on the forecasts, those also assume the current trajectory of revenues and expenses without any of the measures that we're taking to try to reduce expenses and or increase revenues. So that's just the current state of things carried forward. So for example, it doesn't make any assumptions of on the self-insurance fund side of reduced costs based on our new primary care clinic or any of those things. This just takes a look at, as things stand today, this would be the trajectory.
And to that point, I would just say, you know, putting together these kinds of long-term forecasts is an exercise in letting certain things go, right? I mean, you can only model what you can model. If it's not listed here as a spelled out assumption, it's not in the model, right? So what is and is not included, tried to make that as transparent as possible.
Kind of going back to roads, one more time, Bo, we had that big sheet, the big document we were given that's the scores of all the roads at one point. And I remember going back through and spending $4 million a year in the plan here, what we're talking about, right? I mean, it's 3.5, but with available other money. That $4 million was the break even for what was needed to keep our roads where they were, as I remember correctly. Is that right?
That's correct. So there's a lot of math that goes into it, but we ended up at the OCI of 72.1 or something like that. And so the $4 million level kept us flat from an OCI range standpoint. I can tell you in 2024, when that was completed and presented, I don't think they anticipated the fuel prices and petroleum market to be doing what it's doing. So we may be doing more, or maybe doing less with more money at some point, but those projections are keeping us flat at the $4 million level.
And but if we pass the bond that we're talking about at the end of the year, then that's a whole different ballgame, because that's another whole list of streets and activities that are planned out from the committee that they recommended.
Excellent point. So some of the scenarios that I've been trying to keep my, been running here with this software that we've used through our vendor, injects a certain amount of money. And so when we ran this scenario, probably the first of the year, we weren't sure where we were going to end up at the CPAC level and kind of the recommendations to council. So we used a smaller number, but the injection of that bond money into the streets over the 10 years definitely keeps, I want to say that it increases it. I don't want to get to a number standpoint right here, but there was definitely an overall condition index rating that increased over the 10-year bond recommendation package.
And you can handle, manage the CPAC if it were to pass with the current staff you have over what period of time to get all of those implemented and working with the outside construction people and everything?
One more time, Mayor.
So let's pretend the bond passes, and let's pray that the bond passes also. But over what period of time would you implement the construction of the roads that are listed in that bond?
I want to say we're looking at a 10-year plan.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yes.
That's what I thought. And your current staff addresses that 10-year period of what it is without additional staff in the planning right this minute.
We're currently, because the funding isn't just very linear as we're going through those financial options. So I think there are funding or streets that are going to have to start with their funding being in the 10-year plan. So, I mean, completion, I don't know that we can say that we're going to be done in 10 years, but yes, from a scheduling standpoint, we're still looking at how those individual streets align with the year of the funding. But at this point, I'm not asking for an increasing staff, but we may have to be very, very creative on how we design and then put these projects out to construction and from a package standpoint.
And I'm not holding you to that. I'm just kind of making sure that we're kind of thinking in terms of what that looks like into the future and where we're going.
We've already begun.
So we can be addressing the roads, because I know that's very important to a lot of people. And seeing even a slight reduction actually makes people a little crazy sometimes. So.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, Stephen.
Good morning, Mayor and City Council. So I'm about to present the certified tax roll for tax year 2026. This slide is showing you that the total appraised value on a tax roll was $11.3 billion, and the estimated net taxable amount was $8.8 billion. Now, the difference between those two numbers is going to be $2.5 billion and in exemptions. Those exemptions include $1.1 billion in homestead exemptions, $870 million in absolute exemptions, $160 million in disabled veterans exemptions, $245 million for exemptions for individuals over 65. There was also $68 million in business personal property exemptions and $23 million in Freeport inventory value loss. The taxable new construction value was $41.7 million, and in that amount, we do have $16.5 million, that's new value within the TIF, and also $25.5 million of value that's outside of the TIF. The TIF captured value minus new construction or new value is $150 million. Also included in the estimated net taxable amount are properties that are currently under protest with the Appraisal Review Board. There are currently 250 properties that are currently under protest, and it is estimated that the minimum taxable value for these properties will be $99 million. TAD is also included in the estimated taxable value properties that are considered incomplete or in process. And it is estimated that the minimum taxable value for those properties will be $6.1 million. This slide is comparing tax year 25 to tax year 26. As we can see, the appraised value declined 1.18% for appraised value. Estimated net taxable value declined 4.6%. Taxable new construction declined right at 59%. Single-family home market value declined 1.1%, and the average single-family taxable value also declined 1.3%. The major causes for these value decline includes lawsuit following certification process, and also business personal property exemptions, the downward trend in new construction, pad appraisal policy changes, the protest process, and also commercial property exemption. After the city received the 2025 certified roll, there were 109 properties that settled litigation. Those settled litigations reduced the property value in the amount of $228 million. There were also new business personal property exemptions totaling a value loss of $68.7 million. New construction net taxable value decreased by $58.8 million. Another factor that is contributing to the reduced values is the TAD reappraisal plan. So there are no reappraisals for residential properties for the current year. Residential reappraisals have been suspended since 2024. They are scheduled to restart every 2 years beginning in 2027. Also a part of the TAD reappraisal plan is that sales prices will no longer trigger reappraisals, and that there must be clear and compelling evidence for increases above 5% for all property. At a TAD entity meeting July 16th, this slide was providing protest information for the entire county, not just North Richland Hills. And as you can see, in 2025, total protests increased from 272,000 to 307,000. Also, the value loss increased from 2025, 12.5% to 17%. Also included in this slide is information regarding residential protests. In the last year that residential properties were appraised was 2024. And during that year, there were 209,000 protests. For tax year 2026, the total protest totals 269,000. That is a 29% increase since the last appraisal. Another factor contributing to the value reduction is large commercial properties that became exempt. There were 3 of them, removing $79 million in appraised value. These properties were reduced via litigation from the certified amounts and then became exempt. These properties for tax year 2026, the valuation is $93.4 million. This slide is comparing tax year 25 to tax year 26, and it is showing you the different categories of property. As you can see, residential property declined 7.7%. Commercial property increased 0.6%. Industrial properties decreased 9.8%. Mineral lease properties increased 118%. And agricultural properties also increased 1.4%. Of all the properties that are on the certified roll, 64% of those properties are residential, 35% are commercial, and In the other category, you have the industrial, mineral, and agricultural property. The city offers 20% homestead exemptions and also a $36,000 exemption for individuals that are over 65, in addition to a $36,000 exemptions for disabled individuals. There are also property tax ceilings for seniors and disabled persons. Taking a closer look at the tax ceilings, considering all residential properties, there are 6,937 properties, or 32%, that have a senior tax ceiling. 162 properties have disabled person tax ceiling. The taxable value that is frozen on the 2026 certified roll is $1.6 billion. This is a decline from tax year 2025. That value was $1.7 billion. The amount of revenue that is anticipated next fiscal year from this frozen value is $5.9 million, which is also a decline from the prior tax year when the amount of revenue received was $6.1 million. That concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Thank you, Stephen, on your inaugural presentation.
Thank you. So my next presentation, I will go over the city's debt service fund. It is a part of the city's debt management strategy to leverage external resources when possible. And over the past 5 years, 10% of capital projects were paid for with grants and other outside funding. It is also a part of the debt management strategy to utilize cash whenever possible. And over the past 5 years, 38% of all capital projects were paid for with existing cash reserves. Also, a part of the debt management strategy is to maximize revenue alternatives. And there are 6 other funds that pay for capital projects and debt service in addition to the debt service fund. And this strategy helps to minimize the reliance on property tax for debt service. Here we can see the preliminary tax rate distribution showing that the preliminary tax rate for the debt service fund is 0.150895. That is also the city's current debt service rate, so there is no proposed increase for the debt portion of the rate that is being proposed. And that debt service rate totals 27% of the overall tax rate, while the maintenance and operation portion that will go to the general fund is 73%. Here is an overview of the debt service fund. And inside of the debt service fund in the proposed budget, the amount of revenue that is proposed from the INS rate is $10.5 million. There's also self-supporting revenue that will be transferred into this fund in an amount of $724,000. Also budgeted is $126,000 for interest income. And the plan is also to appropriate $1.4 million from the fund's balance, generating a total of $12.9 million in revenue. The bond payments and agent fees also totals $12.9 million for a balanced budget here in the debt service fund. The city's total outstanding debt as of FY27 is $137 million. This slide is showing that the tax-supported portion of that debt is 70% and will be accounted for in the debt service fund. 30% is going to be paid with other revenues, self-supporting revenue, coming from the utility fund, the aquatic park, drainage fund, fleet fund, golf course, and also the parks fund. Here we can see the city's total debt service payments that are scheduled from FY27 through FY44. And these debt service payments do include both principal and interest. And in FY27, the total budgeted debt service amount is $16.4 million. And of that amount, $4.2 million will be paid for with self-supporting revenue. Also, we can see from the slide that the total debt service amount is scheduled to decline each and every year, starting in FY27 through FY44. And in FY44, the amount of debt service payment will decline to less than $1 million. I'll also add that for FY27, we do also have the certificate of obligation added there for the CO that we're in the process of issuing, an amount of $3 million for the replacement fire engine and the replacement ambulance. Also, for the outstanding debt, the interest rate that the city has on those bonds range from 1.4% to 4.1%, with the average being 2.8% borrowing costs. Here we can see that the total outstanding debt is split between the general obligation bonds, 55%, and the certificates of obligations being 44% of the total outstanding debt. And that concludes my presentation, and I can answer any questions.
Any questions? So when you use the term self-supporting in a debt fund, that means, is that income that it's generating on interest that it's paying back in on itself? Is that what that is? Explain that to me. I'm not really quite following.
Yeah, it's just revenue that's coming from other sources other than revenue that's being generated by the property tax rate. And so there are other funds such as the Parks Fund, the Utility Fund, but there are revenues in those funds that are being utilized to pay down the debt service as well.
So those are generating funds, and then that's defined as self-supporting because those are enterprise funds effectively that are paying.
Basically, so what we put in the category of self-supporting debt is, like Stephen said, but just another way to say it is, so the INS portion of the tax rate generates a certain amount of revenue, and that's what we use primarily to pay GOs, COs. But as an example, the water park debt issued for the new ride, that we transfer in from either the half-cent sales tax parks fund or the aquatic park reserves to pay, or a combo of the two to pay off that debt payment. So what we mean is it's not tax supported, or it's not supported by the INS portion of the debt rate. It's transferred from another fund. So utility fund, for example, reserves might be transferred over to pay for utility capital projects, or any debt issued to support a utility capital project.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, I think this is the one we've all been waiting for. We're going to talk about the property tax rate.
It's you are standing between us and food. So.
Okay. Note to self. So before we get into all the details about the property tax rate as proposed and also all of the calculations, I also want to make sure that I put the property tax revenues into context for the overall city budget. So for fiscal year 27, as proposed, property taxes make up 25% of the total revenues of the city. While it's the single largest revenue source, when you think about sort of one decision, one revenue, it is not the largest when we look at it by category. And so charges for service, which include everything from people paying their water bills to paying for a round of golf, paying for an inspection, that amount is the highest at 41%. Not far behind that is sales tax, and this is when we look at sales tax across all funds that receive proceeds from sales tax, not just the general fund, and you can see that the amount goes down from there. As we've been discussing, there is a relationship between values and the no new revenue tax rate. And when we look at what's happened going from 25 to 26, this does include an appraised value decrease of $205 million, a $68 million decrease due to business personal property exemptions happening to our values for the first time this year. We also lost $228 million to lawsuit settlements. So that represents value that was on our tax roll in 25 and is no longer on our tax roll in 26, as well as net taxable values decreasing by $383 million. And I want to make a distinction about that last number. This is what we use to base our actual property tax rates on. So there's a lot of adjustments that happen from values, but the actual amount that we base our values on, our tax rate on, is the net taxable amount. So we know that values are related to tax rates, and so let's talk about what's happened for values over the last several years. According to Tarrant County Appraisal District, the market value for NRH homeowners from 2020 to 2025 has increased, on average, about 42%. So when we see things like how highly we're rated as a place to live, where people want to call home, those sort of things, sort of simple supply and demand, we see that reflected in what's happening in values. Remember, market values are the amount that a home should buy and sell for on the open market. Of course, we're using TAD numbers, so they could be just a little below that full-blown market value. But objectively, these are the numbers that we utilize in order to do comparisons. The other thing that's pretty important here to sort of keep in mind is that as we see market growth in homes, if someone owned their home in 2020 and they had a 41% increase in their value, that really means personal wealth has also increased, right? Your home is something you can leverage for personal wealth. It certainly has been the standard for one of the important ways that we measure personal wealth for people. Appraised value, likewise, has also increased substantially. So appraised value is going to factor in things like caps that are put in place from the state legislature. So if you own your home and that's your primary residence, you have a 10% cap that's in place. So even when we look at appraised values from 2020 to 2025, we have seen an overall increase of about $110,000 on average for properties in North Richland Hills. During that same time, our city council has taken several measures in order to provide property tax relief. And so first starting with the tax rate, that has gone down 8 cents from 2020. In terms of senior and disabled exemptions, while the total exemption has remained the same at 36,000, the total number of people who are now being able to participate in that has increased by 20%. During that same time frame. So the total amount of revenue that has been foregone as a result of that existing policy has in fact increased over time. So there's about a $41.8 million increase in what we've seen in frozen value since 2020. And finally, we have the homestead exemption, and you all will recall that back in 2022, that amount increased from 15% to 20%, which is the current maximum according to state law. So again, values have gone up, but City Council has certainly mitigated the total increase to tax bills by doing a number of different tax relief policies. What that has meant for homeowners in North Richland Hills is that the intervention of City Council, decisions that you all have made, is that bills are lower than they would have been had you not taken on these measures. And so when we look at all of the things in place in 2020 versus the mitigation steps council has taken, that's actually created a net decrease for homeowners in North Richland Hills of $530 on average per home. City property taxes are only part of the total tax bill. So when we sort of take a step back and look at the total tax bill, we are about 24% of the total bill. So this is going to factor in what people are paying to the school districts, the county, the hospital districts, the community college, so on and so forth. And remember, every taxing entity has a different set of rules and caps and considerations and exemptions. So we're all playing by a different set of rules when it comes to the full tax bill that someone is paying. And so you can see here, based on the current fiscal year, adopted rates where folks stand. We show here the difference between Birdville ISD and Keller ISD so that people can see that difference in their total tax bill depending on which ISD they happen to reside in the city. And I will not comment on the difference between the two. So going back to what's happened in the total appraised value. Again, you can see the differences here, the increases in appraised value over time from 2020 to 2025, 44%. But when we overlay that with the total taxes that were paid, so again, most of the entities, the city part of that, but the other taxing entities also did a number of mitigation steps on total tax bills. So even though values increased, we saw actual tax bills decrease by 8%. On average, tax bills decreased by $468.48. So we were not alone in our actions to create tax relief for our residents, and people could see that in what they were actually paying in their bills. Okay, so now we're going to get into a few disclosures before we go into tax rate calculations. So we cannot officially sign the Truth in Taxation form and therefore certify it until after we present the information to you all. It is included in your packet for today. For those of you who'd like to read along with it, the TNT is included on page 68 in your packet. It's 11 pages long. We also receive from Tarrant County, who does our tax collections, our collection rate form. That is included in your packet on page 67. And we also are presenting to you the certified tax roll. That is included in your packet on page 54. After today's presentation, we'll be able to officially sign the Truth in Taxation form, and at that point it is considered to be certified. But we can't do that until we go through today. So you'll notice that when we are talking about our tax rates, we're going to say that they're preliminary, because until we've certified it, it is considered to be preliminary. This is a chart many of you have seen before. This is just a really quick overview of how the tax rate is calculated. This is kind of taking those 11 pages and boiling it down into a visual. So we've got our debt service rate, which is simply a function of our annual debt payments divided by the value of the city and what rate is necessary at that time to assess. Then we have maintenance and operations rate, which comes from existing properties. And then we've got the voter approval rate. We talked a little bit today about tax increment. We're going to go into that in detail in just a little bit. But the voter approval rate cannot exceed 3.5% of the NNR, and that's of the maintenance and operation portion only. And it also factors in 3 years of rolling increment that may be available. Remember that new construction value does not count against us in the calculation of tax rates. So that becomes new revenue to the city for that year, but it is not something that reduces or in any way impacts the overall tax rate. I don't think it's a surprise that as we see our values going down, that the NNR is in fact going up. So for next fiscal year, the no new revenue rate, which is based on the same taxes being collected 1 year to the next, if applied to the same properties in both years, is at 0.533968. As a reminder, the current adopted tax rate is 0.497841. The voter approval rate is the no new revenue rate on the M&O portion plus 3.5%, any unused increment, and also the debt rate. The total voter approval rate for next fiscal year is 0.560313. I want to hone in on your TNT form on page 9 of the form itself. This walks through the explanation of the unused increment rate. So this is not new this year. This is something that has been part of the TNT form itself, but this is part of the calculation that's been a little bit in the background, and this year we want to be sure to bring it forward and have more emphasis on it. The unused increment is the difference between your adopted rate and the VAR for any given tax year. It is just saying, what is that difference? What is that difference in dollar amount, and what does that difference look like in terms of a rate? It establishes what the state calls the foregone revenue amount. That's not something that Paulette and I are making up. It is, in fact, a state term. Lower on that same page, on the TNT form, shows you all the calculation of that increment. So it is a rolling 3-year calculation. So this is going to date back, line 66 is going to be from 25, line 65 is going to be from tax year 24, and line 64 is going to be from tax year 23. So every year, whatever that third year is, falls off of the form. It is only a rolling 3-year calculation. The total from 23 to 25, so our sort of bucket of 3 years of foregone revenue, again, that delta between the rate that's adopted and the VAR is a little over $1 million. The 23 amount is going to expire if it is unused this year. This is the final year for 23 to be available, and the total amount that would expire is $647,915. Typically, we provide to City Council 3 total tax rates: the NNR, the VAR, and what's being recommended for that year. This year, we wanted to expand the rates provided to City Council to make sure that we're providing options to you all that are in between those 3 standard tax rates. So in addition to the VAR, which is the number at the top, we also are offering 2 other rate options. The first one is below the voter approval rate. It's only including that expiring increment, that $647,000 from 2023 that will expire if unused. This rate of $555,144 includes that amount within the tax rate that is being presented. The next rate is below the voter approval rate if there was no increment at all. So remember, the VAR is going to be your NNR plus 3.5% plus increment. So this takes away all the increment and just says what would be the rate if only that 3.5% was included, and that's at $545,920. We've got the no new revenue rate stated again here at the $533,968. What is included in the proposed budget that we're calling the preliminary tax rate until council acts to officially vote on a proposed rate. It is not the proposed rate. It is simply what's been included at this time for the purpose of the budget as presented, and that rate is $555,144. So in your budget, you have that $555,144 included. If City Council was interested in knowing the difference in revenue between that number that's being proposed and the next number, which is the below voter approval rate with no increment, that would be a reduction in revenue of $628,444. And the difference in revenue between the rate that's been included in the proposed budget and the NNR is $1,442,751. Okay, so that just provides sort of the total difference. I know Chase went over the dollar amounts and sort of what would happen at the fund level, but I just want to make sure you all had that delta information included as well. As Stephen presented, the property tax rate, the total rate does include an amount to be paid towards our INS payments for next year, including the the consideration of issuing debt for a new fire engine and also an ambulance. The rate for debt service next year is at 150,895, and the portion for M&O is at 404,249 for a total 555,144. And for comparison, from the current year adopted rate to next year's preliminary rate, you can see that there's not a change in INS, but there is a change in the M&O rate. So the M&O rate, as included in your budget, does increase by about 5.7 cents. When we apply the tax rate to our taxable values for single-family homes, you can see the differences in the values from last year to this year, and also the property tax rate as it is included in your budget, and also what the change would be to city tax bills. As a reminder, based on the actions of City Council, the total tax bill has gone down $530 from what it would have been had council not intervened from 2020. And also, total bills have in fact gone down $468 based on all taxing entities and their decisions collectively over the last few years. While this information is based on the aggregate total average for single-family homes, we encourage people to visit TarrantTaxInfo.com in order to see their individual property tax information. That's going to include individual property exemptions, individual property values, and the sort of things that actually influence what is happening on a given tax bill. We talked earlier about the fact that property taxes are a part of the general fund, but they're not all the revenue in the general fund. We've talked about the fact that when you look across the entire organization, there are a lot of other revenues that are funding city operations. But when we look at the property tax itself, and we look at what is it that the property taxes are paying for. What we've done here is show an allocation of that. This does include all of the outstanding debt, as well as the debt proposed to be paid next fiscal year, which includes the fire engine and also the ambulance. 51% of the property tax rate supports public safety. 24% pays for streets. 9% for city facilities. 6% for parks and libraries, 5% for community and economic development, and 5% for all other, which includes city administration. And so, council, with the property tax rate that is included in your proposed budget, 75% of that money is going towards public safety and streets. Following today's meeting, the TNT form will be certified and submitted. On August the 10th, the City Council will have an item on your agenda to propose the property tax rate for fiscal 27. The rate proposed at that time, would be the maximum that Council can adopt. However, the final adopted rate does not have to be the proposed rate. At the same meeting, City Council will set public hearings for the tax rate. Budget roadshows are scheduled for August the 13th and 22nd. You all will receive additional information about those events soon. This is an opportunity for the community to ask questions and learn more about the tax rate and the budget. Public hearings will be set at the next council meeting. They are recommended by staff to be held during regular meetings on August the 24th and September the 14th. Adoption of the tax rate is scheduled for September the 14th. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Trudy. I think you're going to become my new Chase for Matt, since you're talking my language tax. So
I appreciate being chosen. Thank you.
Yeah. Looking at the incremental rate.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. It looks like for 2024, there actually is no incremental rate for that year. It actually goes down. Does that doesn't factor in as a decrease, or does it factor in somehow?
It does not factor in as a decrease. So that essentially means that it is at zero, that there is no increment from that year. So there's 23, nothing in 24, and then increment again in 25.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Well, this was a tough year to go through this stuff, I can assure you. But I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific. We're breaking early, or we do go ahead and
Do we know if lunch is ready yet? It's not. Does anybody know? Okay. But just while we're checking to see if lunch is ready, again, at the end of the day, we'll revisit the decision points, which includes reaching a consensus on the proposed tax rate. And so just keeping all this in mind, and at that time, we can revisit some of these slides if we need to. But, you know, after lunch, we'll start to go through just each fund, so you can go into that in detail and understand what is in each fund and the changes that were made in each fund. And then, again, we also have on here the special revenue funds for the last part before the decision points. And remember that we've already gone through the special revenue funds with you all in detail in your council meeting. So that plan is just to run through those pretty quickly because you've seen that information before. So anyway, just to kind of give a look ahead of what we're looking at this afternoon. All right, so lunch is ready, and I know we can break. Lunch is upstairs. You can grab that. Mayor, I don't know if you prefer to have people bring their lunch down here and continue while we're eating, or if you want to take a full break and eat while we're up there.
we could take in the full 30 minutes and then just come back then?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right. It is 11:39. We will, City Council will recess the work session for lunch.